Greetings, Missouri Mid-South Conference. I bring you greetings today from my office here at Eden Seminary in the conference office. I just want to share with you how much I have enjoyed getting to know your individual churches and having the wonderful honor of coming to many of your churches and being invited into a conversation. And although the churches may be completely different and the locations may be completely different, the conversation is very similar. And the question that is the foundation of many of our conversations together is, who is God calling us to be as a church? And I have to say, kudos to many of you, for you are asking such an important question, and with such honesty and vulnerability, in ways that encourage you to ask the tough questions, or as I like to describe, naming the elephant in the room. And sometimes the elephant has to do with conflict, or it has to do with the tension of how church used to be and how it's shifted, and the anxiousness around changing the church to meet the needs. Again, that question of, who is God calling us to be? In some of our churches, the conversation has been very honest and raw in asking, is God calling us to close, to end? And how do we do that with integrity? Another type of conversation in answering that question, is God calling us to reimagine? Perhaps to sell the building, because so much of our resources financially and in terms of membership are going into sustaining the building itself that is older and needs a lot of care. So is it possible that God is calling us to sell our building so that we can shift our resources to the community and to missions and ministries that give us energy and passion, to which God again is calling us? I would say many of us in the Missouri Mid-South Conference, your churches are asking the vital question that is so important for so many of our churches, not only our churches, but the question that the Missouri Mid-South Conference is sitting with, as well as the wider denomination, the United Church of Christ. I've been reading this book entitled Facing Decline, Finding Hope, written by Jeffrey Jones, and it's talking about this very issue of churches, like all of us, who are facing decline in membership and energy and financial resources. And how do we have that conversation? How do we trust each other and trust God in our conversation to have the tough conversation so that we can reimagine and we can recreate and we can invite God to reimagine and recreate where we are? And so Dr. Jones says this on page 6. All too often, churches avoid those issues that, if faced, would require profound and radical change in the church, from its structure to its ministry to its worship, even to its need for a building. And yet it is only in facing these issues that congregations can find genuine reason for hope. If a congregation is to become a crucible of hope, it will need to undertake a journey through the valley of the shadow of death, where we face all fears and threats. There is something essentially Christian about this process. One might even see it as a process of death and resurrection. And yet, many congregations are reluctant to do this. It's almost as if they don't believe their own stuff. End quote. Wow. I don't know about you, but when I read that, it is so right on target with the conversations that I have been honored to have with many of you, but also the challenge of the honest conversations and issues that we're really talking about. And the crux of it for all of us is this issue of death and resurrection. And if we are an Easter people, then shouldn't that Easter also be reflected in our very church life? What is God calling you to do, to be, as a local church? It comes as no surprise to me that during this time, especially in the next week, as we look forward to Pentecost Sunday, the Sunday that we celebrate the birth and the birthday of the Big C Church, that we in the United Church of Christ take an offering called Strengthen the Church. And this offering is a phenomenal offering because what it does is it goes back into the conference and the national church setting to equip and resource and empower local churches. It is literally and spiritually strengthening the church, so that every dollar that is given to strengthen the church, 50% of it goes to the denomination, the United Church of Christ, the national church, for providing things and ministries that do church starts, church vitality, the relationship with the Center for Progressive Renewal. But 50% of it stays here in the Missouri Mid-South Conference, which excites me to no end because we are literally and spiritually investing in ourselves, in strengthening the church, not only our church, our local church, but when we give to strengthen the church, we are strengthening the churches where we are far away from in terms of the rural areas of Missouri, Little Rock, Arkansas, the urban areas of Memphis and St. Louis and Kansas City, so that no longer is it just our little place and we're thinking about who is God calling us to be in our small local church setting. It's who is God calling us to be in creative ways with other churches throughout our conference. And as the Missouri Mid-South Conference, what we do with the Strengthen the Church offerings is focusing on church vitality, is focusing on new beginnings, is focusing on those areas where we can give back and give resources back to the local church. Now, here's an interesting fact that may be a little bit uncomfortable. Of all of the 5 UCC offerings, the lowest giving offering is Strengthen the Church, which is really kind of interesting because a lot of people, and maybe a lot of denominations, this would be the strongest one. You are strengthening your local church. Whereas in our denomination, a lot of our other offerings that go to missions and ministries and social justice that are beyond our local churches get the bulk of our offering money. But I would say that when we invest in Strengthen the Church, that we still very much are investing in those ministries that we are passionate about. Because if we don't have a strong local church, we don't have strong ministries and missions and social justice. Last year in 2015, out of our then 145 churches, only 56 churches gave to Strengthen the Church. I looked this up to make sure, and the amount for Strengthen the Church was $19,000, as opposed to the other offerings that were about $34,000, $36,000, $65,000. So you can see how significantly lower Strengthen the Church is. I want to make a personal invitation and request that your church considers giving to Strengthen the Church this year, so that we can indeed begin and continue to empower and equip the local church settings for ways in which we can help those churches in traditional settings and those churches that are feeling God's Spirit moving them outside of the box to try to be 3.0. There's a lot of creativity in our conference and in our local churches, and giving to strengthen the church will help in sharing those resources. So as we talk about asking the question of who is God calling us to be as a local church, as we continue to remember that in our decline come those issues, and in that conversation comes a living out of how we are called to be Easter people, where there is indeed death and there is indeed resurrection. And I would invite you to consider giving to strengthen the church so that we can continue both in the Missouri Mid-South Conference as well as the National UCC to empower, invest, and equip our local churches to live into who God is calling them to be. To that end, I want to personally share that I will be writing a check for $100 to strengthen the church out of my own belief and passion that it is vital that we strengthen our local churches in the Missouri Mid-South Conference so that we can continue to live out who God is calling each of our churches and then our conference to be. In the name of the Holy One that continues to call and speak and dance and sing and move among us, this day and forevermore. Amen.